And we're back on the Fowler Show. Now, listen, America, I got to tell you, there's been this big conversation about the president's second-term agenda. Is he failing? Is he succeeding? It just seems as though there's really not a clear answer. But I listen, folks, you know, I profess to be a pro on a lot of things. But this one, I leave it to the journalists to do what they do. We're joined by contributing editor from TheRoot.com, David Swerdlick. Is that the correct? I got the.
You got it perfectly. Yeah.
Bam! One for the home team. Welcome to the program. Welcome to the program. So tell me, is he succeeding? Is he failing? What? Give me a grade here.
Well, I think he is. I think it's too early to give a grade, and that's something that I've written about this last week. Right? Is that if you look back to the first 100 days of President Obama's first term, a lot that we now take for granted had not happened yet. So this idea that whether you want him to succeed or want him to fail, or you evaluate him as, you know, getting things done or not getting things done, the idea that we're going to render a decision 100 days or now about 105 days into his first term seems to me to just be quite unrealistic. If you go back to May of 2009, at this point in his first term, President Obama was on the verge of 10% unemployment. The stock market had cratered to about 6,000. We were still in Iraq. He had yet to escalate in Afghanistan. No one was even talking about healthcare reform yet. This was all 100 days. We were talking about Somali pirates in the first 100 days, right? So people had no sense of what was coming down the pipe. So if you had told people 100 days into his first term, oh, actually, healthcare reform, he's actually going to pass Mitt Romney's healthcare plan. He's actually going to get out of Iraq. He's actually going to hunt down and kill Osama bin Laden. The stock market is going to double. People would have said, oh, really? You know, so the idea that we're forecasting everything that's going to happen in the first term based on a couple of legislative setbacks this spring, I just don't buy it.
I hear that. So what do you say to the argument that a lot of progressives out there are making? They're saying, you know, the president's just gone too, he's trying to, you know, in the sense of, you know, compromise and bipartisanship, that he's sort of selling the baby with the bathwater.
Well, it depends on what issue, right? Let me take an easier one first. Let's look at the gun control bill that was filibustered and was unsuccessful. That's a case where, frankly, I see it as, even though it was a legislative loss for President Obama, I see it as he put his shoulder to the wheel. He toured around the country, made the case to the people, anyway, for background checks, right? I mean, President Obama, number one, didn't even have gun control on his agenda. The Sandy Hook tragedy came along. It got put on his agenda, and he would have liked to have seen, I think if you ask anybody in the White House, an assault weapons ban, background checks,
ban on high-capacity magazines.
Right, a ban on high-capacity magazines. It became pretty clear early on that they were only going to get, if they got anything, the background checks. So that was what they put their, they meaning the White House, congressional Democrats, put their efforts into that, and they were ultimately unsuccessful, but it wasn't, in my view, for lack of trying. There's some criticism that he doesn't play hardball behind the scenes with members of Congress, and maybe that's the case, but I don't think you can say he didn't try in that case. Take another issue, though, where I think, and this is what I think you may be talking about, where progressives maybe are more disappointed in him, something like the budget discussions that are on the horizon, and progressives see the president willing to make concessions on Social Security, right? Going to the chained CPI format, which is going to reduce the increase in benefits over time for retirees. And I hear progressives saying, why would you cave on that when Republicans aren't giving you anything in return? And that's a valid concern, I think, on the part of progressives. Here's what I'd say to that. Number one, I actually think chain CPI is a bad idea, but I also recognize that the White House is looking for something that they can latch onto as something that they can say, here, we're making a concession. Now, Republicans, it's your turn. And whether or not they're going to get a concession in return from Republicans, I think they still feel like they've got to make a concession, which, to your point, disappoints progressives, because progressives, I think, would like to see the president draw a harder line when it comes to entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. But my view is that they're in a difficult position, and they're going to have to make concessions one place or the other if a deal is going to get done.
And I hear that, David, and I think, as somebody who is a progressive, I hear that, and I get where you're coming from. I think to some of my progressive colleagues and progressive friends, they get mad at me when I say the same thing. I'm like, to some extent, this president's really sort of he's between a rock and a hard place. He really, the Republican caucus in the House is so far to the right. They've dug their feet in. And the 5 or 6 votes that he needs to loosen up in the Senate, those votes are, they come or they go. It really depends upon the issue. And so I think he's in a really, really tough spot. And I think sometimes as progressives, and I say this all the time, and progressives get mad at me when I say it, it seems as though we've dug our feet in on this one issue of entitlements, when there are other issues where I think we can make a lot of headway and ground, and we choose not to deal with them because we're all focused on entitlements.
No, I think you make a good point, and it sounds like we largely agree on that point about the president and the White House being in a very tough spot, and the reality, as your listeners well know, that the president can influence Congress, he can put pressure on Congress, but he doesn't have a vote in Congress. And if there's a whole one house of the Congress, the House of Representatives, that is controlled by Republicans, and that most financial bills start in the House rather than the Senate, which is controlled by Democrats, there are limits on what Obama can do. Can I get a little philosophical on you and take a step back?
Take us back to class, man.
Look. I don't think President Obama is a progressive. And I think that 4.5 years in, I do think that both progressives and conservatives need to start getting their hands around that idea. Obama is a conventional politician. He's a very talented politician. His personal background is unconventional in the sense that he's, grew up in Honolulu, and he's, comes from a multiracial, multi-faith family, but he's a conventional, middle-of-the-road, let's get things done type of politician, not an ideologue for the left, certainly not for the right either. And so when people say, why isn't he being more progressive? It's like, because that's not who the guy is.
To begin with.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that point. And to be perfectly honest, as somebody, and this is definitely not mentioned in your article, but I think everybody's gonna. This will definitely be the new conversation in Washington. It's a conversation that we talk about way too much here on the Fowler Show. We're talking about it in the next segment as well.
Sure.
It's this whole ideal of how this all interplays with the fact that in a couple of days from now, another one of the president's key voting blocks, they're going to be, their heads are going to be in the chopping block as the Stafford rates double, and young people will now face a doubling in their Stafford loan interest rates. And, we haven't really heard much from the White House on it. We haven't heard much from your traditional progressive groups on it either, who we've heard a lot from on Social Security. And it just seems as though, and what I think in my mind, as somebody who's sort of a millennial and a younger person, is I think this is an issue where the president can sort of say, hey, listen, so I gave out the baby with the bathwater on chain CPI, but I'm going to stick on this one, and I think force Republicans to come to the table. But we haven't seen that either.
Right, and in fairness to the president, and in fairness to progressives, conservatives so far seem unwilling to come to the table on just about anything. And this was part of the article that I wrote that you were referencing. That, to their eternal shame, frankly, I think conservatives in Congress or Republicans in Congress tend to oppose anything that Obama is for on general principle, regardless of whether they've been for it in the past and regardless of whether they think there's any merit to it. They seem hell-bent on defeating Obama at every turn or thwarting him at every turn. The perfect example, I would say, goes back to healthcare reform. It was early on. President Obama was, a less experienced president in 2009, but he had to have thought, gee, if I offer up Mitt Romney's health care plan, surely I'll get some Republican votes on it.
I hear you you on that.
And he didn't. He barely got enough Democratic votes. In terms of student loans, I think you raise an excellent point, because these are the kind of issues that are getting sort of swept under the rug right now. In terms of a legislative agenda, though, I do think that the White House is trying to clear the decks for immigration. I think they think that there's a limited bandwidth for members of Congress and for the public in terms of what people can sort of take in and digest at one time, and they want immigration reform, and bringing in a lot of other things at this point is going to muddy the narrative for them.
I love that, David. We have just a couple seconds left of the interview. Sure. Don't worry, because I got to tell you, I already like the conversation. I'm pretty sure the answer, we're definitely going to bring you back to talk more about this and going on further. But in the last couple of seconds, what is it out there that the American people need to know about the president's second-term agenda? And you have about 3 seconds.
3 seconds. They're going to focus on a few things. Immigration. They probably will go back to gun control at some point. And now foreign policy is taking center stage. And, you know, we can talk about that next time.
I appreciate you so much for being on the show, David.
Hey, thanks a lot. I enjoyed it.